It's true for the students that attended from the Krutsinger program. It's true for anybody that goes to the conference and attends and realizes these are regular people within the industry sitting around a table, making contributions to the discussion, to the analysis, to the decisions about what the industry stands for. Whether you're in this group or that group or another group, being engaged in the policy process, being engaged in the deliberative discussions is an important part of being a leader in the industry.
The beef industry has been one of the strongest parts of the agricultural economy in recent years, but the policy questions ahead are complicated. Hear about the big policy topics in the beef industry covered at this year's Cattle Industry Convention, and how a group of Nebraska students engaged in the policy discussion. That's now on Nebraska Farmcast. From the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, this is Nebraska Farmcast. I'm Ryan Evans, and I invite you to check out our center's resources for farm and ranch management and decision-making on our website at cap.unl.edu. On this episode, I'm glad to be joined again by Dr. Brad Lubben, Extension Ag Policy Specialist here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, to talk through his latest policy report column in Nebraska Farmer. It discusses his work with students in the Krutsinger Beef Industry Scholars program here at Nebraska, who recently attended the 2026 Cattle Industry Convention in Nashville to study some of the major policy issues facing the industry right now. Their work offers a snapshot of the larger conversations happening across the beef sector, from cattle marketing and livestock insurance to international trade and traceability. We'll cover those topics now with Dr. Lubben, and I'm glad to welcome him back to Nebraska Farmcast. Brad, thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, Ryan.
So you made the trip to this year's Cattle Industry Convention in Nashville, as I mentioned, with students in the Krutsinger Beef Industry Scholars program here at UNL. Mm-hmm. Can you just start with explaining the scope of that program and what students experience throughout?
Yeah. The first thing I should say is Dr. Elliott Dennis and I had the privilege of co-teaching the senior class in the Krutsinger program. The Beef Industry Scholars Program is a 7-semester long focus on issues in the beef industry. So freshmen start by taking courses their second semester, and then they work together as a cohort throughout their college career, learning about different facets of the beef industry, from production to processing, marketing, and so forth. Well, we spend a semester wrapping up their program with a focus on policy issues and going to the Cattle Industry Convention and seeing policy discussions in process, and learning that process and the depth of those issues gives us an opportunity to come home and really study those issues a little more deeply to prepare this group of students to become future leaders in the industry.
And we'll talk more about the program before we wrap up here, but you use this trip with the students to CattleCon this year to really frame in your latest policy report column the major policy issues facing the beef industry right now. And you've written how the beef industry is certainly a bright spot in the agricultural economy right now. What's made it so strong at a time when the crop sector is facing more financial pressure?
Yes, it's certainly a reality that the beef industry is driving the state ag economy at the moment. In fact, if we look at farm income numbers in general that I look at regularly, 4 years ago, the livestock sector and the crop sector were largely on par with each other in terms of total receipts. This year, the livestock sector is more than twice the crop sector in terms of total receipts. And 90% of the livestock sector is cattle in Nebraska. So we know it's the cattle industry. We know prices are up. We know it's because supplies are down. The cattle herd is low, which limits the availability of feeder cattle and cattle to be fed. And so it limits supplies. Consumer demand has held up amazingly well. And record prices have helped drive receipts and profitability higher all the way back through the supply chain. It doesn't mean there aren't challenges and issues ahead, but certainly some of the issues are maybe a little bit less onerous given the great returns at the moment.
Yeah, and you write about how those strong prices and tight supplies that the economy right now in the beef sector, it really kind of led to more muted discussions at this year's convention than in the past when it comes to cattle market discussions. How does the conversation change then when producers are benefiting from these high prices, but also they're facing higher financial exposure?
Yeah. Well, fundamentally, I think of the cattle marketing, and there's a cattle marketing committee discussion that happens at the national conference. Oftentimes, cattle marketing committee is concerned about the competitiveness of the marketplace, whether there are ample bids, whether there is enough transparency and competition in the market to find and receive a fair price. Well, at this point in time, when cattle supplies are so short, it's actually the cattle producers that may have the most leverage in the market, as opposed to traditional perspectives that it's the feeders and the agribusiness sector that has more control. Well, at the moment, then cattle feeders and ultimately calf producers are benefiting from that leverage in the market, and suddenly price discovery isn't quite the issue it was. It's still an issue. There are still concerns. There's still national discussions of concentration in the sector and an analysis of whether the sector is competitive or not. But the immediate focus on price discovery and price transparency isn't quite the same as it is when prices are struggling. That doesn't mean that producers don't face risk, and that doesn't mean that producers aren't still concerned about the bottom line. At these record prices, we also have record capital investments in those animals, and volatility in the marketplace that is dramatic from one day or 1 week to the next. So producers may be enjoying record prices and record returns for the moment. They're also facing much greater risks than they have. One of the tools that we see that's also discussed during these meetings and across the industry is the use of some of the newer risk management products. Livestock revenue protection is a price risk management product. The pasture range and forage program is a drought-focused production management component. Helps you manage your grazing capacity. So both of those insurance tools have really come on board in the last 20 to 25 years. Both of those have grown dramatically in terms of their usage and have become an important part of the cattle producers' risk management portfolio.
Are there questions with products like those that still need to be worked through?
Well, both of those products have grown from pilot to really widespread adoption in the last several years, and they have seen substantially increased support levels in terms of federal support for what we call the premium subsidy or the cost share the Fed provides. Producers face a price break in terms of the premium they pay for the insurance. It's not yet on par with what the federal government subsidizes on the crop side of the ledger. So there is some discussion, some question of how much federal support is there? Is it enough? Should there be more? There's also some question always of particularly the price risk management products, livestock revenue protection or livestock gross margin or some of those other products. Do they really cover all of the risk that a producer faces? They're tied to a national price that leaves basis risk in there. They're identified according to a futures transaction or a futures-based price, and so the specifics of that contract don't necessarily match what everybody's producing. It leaves some gaps or at least some potential concerns about how well the tools work, but clearly they do provide help and they've been adopted widely.
Great. And I know if you're following the beef industry, trade has obviously been a big topic recently. Can you explain why the U.S. can be a net importer of cattle and pounds of beef, but still be a net exporter in terms of beef value?
Yeah, and it's it is the quintessential question about trade and what's the benefit of trade. And as a trade economist or as an economist studying trade policy issues, I would often characterize trade and the benefits of trade are fundamentally about consumers. Consumers benefit from having new products or more products available and price competitiveness and so forth. Trade politics tend to be about producers, and it's supporting or protecting production resources and investments from competition from elsewhere, whether it's fair or unfair. Well, in the trade arena, the cattle industry, the beef industry, kind of lives in both sectors. They benefit from consumer demand that drives exports, that drives domestic demand as well, certainly, but that drives exports. And that's exports for some of the higher value products that the U.S. produces, muscle cuts, steaks, and roast. They also benefit from foreign consumer demand for variety meats, the kinds of things that most American consumers don't touch. And so there's value in the carcass that otherwise wouldn't be there were it not for the benefits of exports and the export of beef and beef products globally. There's also import competition, and there is import competition in terms of live animals. Arguably, that's because the U.S. has I think, a comparative advantage in feeding animals and processing animals compared to its neighbors and compared to much of the world. And so importing live animals from Canada, importing live animals from Mexico, when we don't have a New World screwworm outbreak to worry about. Those are kinds of things that actually support the domestic industry as opposed to directly compete for prices for animals. Well, it does offer more supply of animals. So yes, a producer of animals thinks about imports as competition. A producer of beef thinks about trade as an opportunity. And so there's always a distinction between which side of the trade do you feel impacted by. The other reality, some of our imports are beef. Well, that's imports typically of beef trim, lean beef trim. That's what gets ground into our hamburger mix. The U.S. seems to be an outsized consumer of hamburger. We love it in almost every form. And with the animals we produce and the muscle cuts and higher value animals that we're sending or that we're processing, we have a shortage of beef trim to produce the mainstay hamburger blend. And so getting that from elsewhere adds value to the tallow and the remainder of the carcass here as well. So that's more of a complementary import. It's a complementary good, not a substitute, but it looks like imports. And so when we look at statistics, yes, it looks like we import more animals. We certainly do. We import more pounds of beef. We do. Traditionally, we export more dollar value of beef than we import. In the midst of trade conflict at the moment, that's hurting a bit, but fundamentally, those are reasons why we focus so much on trade and trade issues.
Thanks. And you also write about traceability and labeling showing up in different policy discussions, I'm sure, at CattleCon. Those were topics of discussion. So from we're talking about animal disease management to the product of the United States labeling discussion and alternative proteins. Why do these issues keep coming back, and what are some potential cost benefits to watch for producers especially?
Yeah, we certainly saw quite a bit of discussion on traceability and labeling, and I combined them both when I wrote about them in the column. But fundamentally, you pick a committee discussion and some element of it comes up there. It was part of the international trade discussion because there's a new U.S. label for product of the United States. It's a federally defined label, but it's a voluntarily adopted label. It's a replacement effectively for the mandatory country of origin labeling rule that was passed back in the 2002 Farm Bill, but ultimately was found illegal in terms of trade agreements. And so it had to be dropped. Well, it was dropped for beef and pork. This voluntary product of the United States label is a viable alternative to replace it for those producers and processors and wholesalers, retailers that want to track that pedigree and sell that labeled product. It doesn't stop the debate about country of origin labeling or some of the ongoing issues of labeling, but it is it's an example of where there might be a government role, a policy role to define something, even if it's a voluntary market-driven solution. Well, so traceability and labeling shows up in an international trade discussion. It also shows up, of course, in cattle health and well-being and the focus on animal disease management. Right now, the example for New World screwworm is to stop it at the border and try and establish protocols before any animal imports return. But for some animal diseases that are already endemic to the United States, and the reality of what's the role of traceability in helping to manage those diseases, to prevent or to mitigate and respond if an animal disease outbreak occurs. Well, traceability is not a new concept. Ideas of traceability have been around forever. We could go far enough back, and traceability meant fundamentally ownership. And we could talk about Nebraska brand law, but that's another topic, another column maybe. But traceability in terms of managing animal identification, animal health, there was a national animal ID plan about 25 years ago. The idea that you would identify every animal, every premises, and every movement of every animal so that you could, in fact, trace every animal within 48 hours if there was a disease outbreak. That whole national plan never took off for lots of reasons: economic concerns, privacy concerns, liability concerns, marketability, and so forth. But yet we still need some mechanism and some animal disease management program in place. And so there's continuing focus on traceability. A management implication, not a policy implication, is that traceability is hard to wrap your head around as a regulatory-driven issue unless you can also figure out that traceability gives you management benefits, like managing by the head instead of by the herd, managing inputs, identifying preferred genetics, and so forth. So the more that we can identify benefits within the herd or within the feedlot of traceability, the less maybe resistance or concern there would be to the role of traceability as an overall animal health and marketing opportunity. Those are the issues that show up in traceability. Of course, it also blends over into labeling. And if you take a focus on general ag policy discussions, there's quite a bit of focus on labeling for what we might call alternative proteins, or if you're in the industry, you might prefer the term fake meat, but fundamentally know what we're talking about. The idea of labeling it or establishing rules in terms of how it can be labeled and what it can be called and what it can't be called, it's all fundamentally about what it communicates to the consumer amid the reality that there are so many different labels and so many different definitions out there already for almost everything that labeling confusion is a real thing too. And educating the consumer or establishing some guidelines and boundaries on what labeling can and can't say is an important question.
So all of these topics tackled at CattleCon in Nashville with the students in the Krutsinger Beef Industry Scholars program. As we mentioned, you helped lead them there. What do you think that they gained out of this experience, being there, participating, perhaps at least witnessing these policy debates, getting exposed to the issues and discussions happening there? What did they gain? Why does that matter for the future of the beef industry?
You know, it's true for the students that attended from the Krutsinger program. It's true for anybody that goes to the conference and attends and realizes these are regular people within the industry sitting around a table, making contributions to the discussion, to the analysis, to the decisions about what the industry stands for. Whether you're in this group or that group or another group, being engaged in the policy process, being engaged in the deliberative discussions is an important part of being a leader in the industry. And that's something that the scholars learned by going to the convention, to see it firsthand, to see that engagement. They came home. We ran them through several more weeks. So we took them to convention. There's almost a week-long trip near the beginning of the semester. And then we come home and we keep them engaged the rest of the semester back in the classroom. And they were involved in analyzing these issues and actually presenting testimony in a mock committee hearing format. So get them ready, get them prepared to contribute to the process, whether it's committee discussions or testimony to a legislative committee. They're ready to become leaders in the industry.
And I know the Krutsinger Beef Industry Scholars Program is offered as a minor. More information about that is available from the Department of Animal Science here at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. You can check out their website. And we certainly encourage listeners to read Brad's latest column in Nebraska Farmer's Policy Report or on our website as well for the Center for Ag Profitability at cap.unl.edu to find out more about the policy issues facing the beef industry right now and how the Krutsinger Beef Industry Scholars Program, is certainly supporting the future of the beef industry here at Nebraska. Brad, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to Nebraska Farmcast, a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm Ryan Evans, and you can find a host of farm and ranch management resources, including articles, decision tools, videos, and more on the Center for Agricultural Profitability's website, cap.unl.edu.